Happy Father's Day. You're
Thank
all
you.
dads. That's beautiful. So today, as I said before, we're talking about my papa is your papa. That's kind of what Jesus says over and over again. But long before Jesus, there is God's little instruction book. In fact, long before God's little instruction book, there's a God's instruction book, and it's actually found in Proverbs, which is where our first text comes from today. In Proverbs, it says this: "Listen, my sons and daughters, to a father's instruction. Pay attention and gain understanding. I give you sound learning, so do not forsake my teaching. For I too was a son to my father, still tender and cherished by my mother. Then he taught me, and he said to me, 'Take hold of my words with all your heart. Keep my commands, and you will live.'" Research shows central to our happiness is family, is being with people, and we tend to call that family. Now, the last 50 years, that term and the meaning of family has changed a little bit. 50 years ago, I was the youngest of 4 children. Aww, that's my pop. And this guy went off to work every day while my mom stayed home and raised all of us. But we know that's a lot different now, don't we? I mean, we know families can be 1 parent or 2 parents or 3 or 4 parents. We have blended families and patchwork families. We have nuclear families that live in 2 separate households, and we have divorced families that live in the same households. We have 2 dads and 2 moms, grandparents raising kids, families living in cooperatives. There's a big one actually in Bloomington, raising their children together. Helping rear each other's children and living in such a way that their children have a very big family. That's what family looks like in this 21st century. You know, the number 1 predictor, as I stated before, to happiness is the time you spend with people. And the people we spend time with, quality time with, the time away from work, are the people we tend to call our family, either family by choice or our traditional family. Bruce Feiler has written a book called The Secrets of Happy Families, and I share it because it is a great resource for all people when you think about what family means in this 21st century. He has gotten all kinds of research together and had this book, which is simply amazing. And that was the first book I started with, but then that book led me to another book. And this book is called The Council of Dads, a second book that Bruce wrote. Actually, he's written a number of books. This book was the result of him being diagnosed with cancer. He was diagnosed with cancer at the time that his twin girls were 3 years old, and the prognosis was not good. His number 1 concern after his diagnosis was not about him, but of course, it was about his daughters. And who was going to be their dad? When faced with his own mortality, he asked himself, would his kids ever wonder what he was or what he thought about? Would they wonder who he was going to be or the work that he did? Would they yearn for his approval? Would they yearn for his love and for his voice? He had these thoughts going through his head day after day. And so finally, on the 3rd day after his diagnosis, he realized he wanted to make sure that his daughters had the love of a dad like he had as well. So he decided that he wanted to reach out to the men who had had an impact on his life and on his journey and ask them if they indeed would reach out to his own daughters in the same way they had reached out to him. He ended up reaching out to 6 different people, and he referred to it as the Council of Dads. When he asked these men to participate, he knew then, after they said yes, that no matter what happened to him, his daughters would be okay. They would not only be okay, but they would have a council of dads in his absence. He was very specific about what he wanted and needed from each man. There was Ed, his friend from childhood, who he was friends with from the time that they were in kindergarten, and he had vivid memories of the 2 of them just slopping through puddles as little guys and then getting on their bikes and riding through puddles as they grew older, and that kind of same energy lived throughout their friendship. He had another guy named Bruce who was his camp counselor who, when he graduated from high school, Bruce and a whole team of people from his church took a trip to Europe. And when they were in Holland, Bruce woke him up, or Jeff woke up Bruce in the middle of the night and said, come on, let's go cow tipping in Holland. And so the two of them snuck out of the place that they were staying, and they went out, and he said it was pretty fascinating because they had to go over a moat in order to do this. It was this fantastic memory that Bruce had of Jeff that lasted a lifetime. He wanted his girls to have a spirited person like Jeff in their life who would turn a trip, or any vacation, into an adventure. And of course, his friends said yes. There was his college friend, Max, who taught Bruce how to live each day to the fullest, no matter what. There was his business partner, David, who had this great will he had never experienced in anybody else. He said, where there was a wall, David has the ability to go around it, to go over it, barely see it. And when you're writing in the 21st century, there are a lot of walls. But David is such a great partner or business partner that he takes all those walls away. He asked David to be part of the council. He asked his friend Ben, who actually was his doctor, and what he appreciated most about Ben was that Ben had the ability to not only ask questions, but to live into the questions that he had for living. Not only to live into them, but to seek the answers for them. Finally, he asked a poet friend named Joshua, who came to realize that Bruce asking him to be part of this council was one of the most important requests and significant requests he had ever had in his life. And Bruce's willingness to ask him to do that led him to keep writing something that would have an impact on his girls and thus on all of us. What I love about the Council of Dads is Bruce took the time to specifically identify what different gifts these friends brought to his life. Not only did he identify them, but he named them. And then he had a way of thanking his friends for the impact that they had had on his life. He not only thanked them, but what greater honor as a friend to have another friend who may die say to you, will you be willing to have a similar impact on my family? You know, in some way or another, we all have a council of dads who have assisted on this journey we call life. And how important it is for each and every one of us to be mindful not only of our own fathers, but of the council of people who have impacted us in one way or another on the journey. How we have garnered learnings and experiences from all kinds of people, not just the ones whose house we grew up in. I think the author of Proverbs was trying to get to something there and saying that it is our job in life to nurture and to care for other people. And in doing so, we share the gifts that have been passed on to us from generation to generation. I really think that's all he's saying. He says, listen, son, to a father's instructions, pay attention and gain understanding. I give you sound learning, so do not forsake my teaching. For I, too, was a son to my father and cherished by my mother. And then he taught me and said, take hold of my words with all your heart, keep my commands, and you will live. We are all called in that same way to father and parent others. The lessons of love that we have been taught, we too can pass on. In a world where we're moving so quickly, most importantly on this Father's Day, it's important to remember that you have a council of dads to be thankful for, and you too are a part of someone else's council. We each have to have a willingness to step out in faith and share our wisdom, knowledge, and love with others, and in turn, thank those who have shared their wisdom, knowledge, and love with us. I was reminded this past week of someone who is in my council. I learned quite abruptly that last September, Bob Epps, who was the pastor who encouraged me to go into ministry, died. And I didn't even know it until I went to annual conference. He died last September. Bob Epps was the first pastor I ever worked under. And I have to tell you, I was quite a wild child when I went to work for the church. And I got into a little trouble one day. Might have ended up in the back of a police car or something. I don't quite remember. But I was called to Bob's office, who was the pastor who worked in the ministry I was in. And he sat me down and he said, "I think we need to talk." Okay, so I had been arrested, not really arrested, just held, in front of some people at the racetrack that just happened to go to the church. And I assumed I was going into his office to be fired. He said, "We need to talk." He said, "Clearly, you have some anger issues. And I'm going to give you 3 options. Either you go find a therapist and you bring back the receipts to prove you're going, of your choice. You go to a therapist that I choose and I'll pay for half of it, or you find another job." I decided to do what Bob said. I was so amazed that not only did Bob continue to have faith in me, even though as I sat in the back of that squad car, and it's a long story that we don't have time for today. It was, as I sat back there, I just decided I've screwed something else up and I'm going to have to find another job. But he did not believe that. In fact, not only did he not believe that, he believed that I had a spirit of God within me. I just had to keep working to find it. He believed in me in a powerful way. And what was interesting to me was he was the kind of guy who taught me that just about anybody could be a pastor. He went to Yale, but let me tell you, he had the worst dirty word mouth that I've ever heard in my whole life. But he loved God more than you could imagine. And he taught me that I too had the love of God within, and I too could clean up my language and become a pastor. I was so, and I still am so saddened to learn that Bob passed away and I didn't know it. They didn't have a service yet for him. But he was a strong part of my counsel. In fact, I probably wouldn't be standing before you today if he had not identified the fact that maybe there was a little something going on inside of me, and he believed in me. And that has made all the difference. I pray to God that I too have somebody who crosses the line come to me someday, and they probably already have, and I too can say, the Spirit of God is within you. God works through the likes of you and me. Let's figure out what God has in store beyond your limited view. I give God thanks for Bob Epps and all those who serve on my council. I'm not the only one with counsel. There are many. Not long ago, we discovered this story about a guy who is fathering kids while he drives a bus. Take a look at this. For the Huffington Post. She wrote it in honor of her father after his death, and she shared a story about how she went to his grave to put some flowers one day, and she noted in the background this family who kept going from stone to stone to stone, and they kept getting closer and closer and closer. Finally, they were right on her and at her father's stone. And the older gentleman who was with his his family says, my papa, and he hugged the stone. Now, some might freak out if they were there at their father's gravestone and someone who is even of a different race came up and said, my papa. But she went on to learn that this man emigrated to the United States, and that her father, without her even knowing, had had a great impact on this man and his family. In fact, he owed everything. He owed all of his success and his ability to make it in the world to her father. He came here wanting to open a restaurant, but he had limited language, so her father not only helped him do that, but also they met as he rented a place to them for far under market value when he first moved here. Then he went with him and worked through all the logistics of opening a restaurant, finding the space, and loaning him money. Not only did he do that, but as the man went on to have children, he would help get them enrolled in school. He would help make sure they had everything they needed. And the most amazing thing about this is his daughter, Kathleen, never knew that her dad was doing this. Never knew. I personally believe that this is how God is calling us to work in this world. God is calling each and every one of us to serve on the council. God is calling each and every one of us to be step-parents to kids who don't know their parents. You don't have to be a man. You don't have to have children. You need only have a heart and believe in the powerful possibilities that come with loving another with a parent's love. Our closing video here is about step-parenting, and as you watch it, be mindful about what step you could play in the role of someone else.